Like a force of nature, the Eurovision Song Contest has descended upon us once more, and whether you embrace it wholeheartedly or enjoy it at an ironic distance, there's no denying it's a spectacle unlike any other. Eurovision is so much more than just a music contest. Outside of international sports, Eurovision is the world's largest annual live broadcast event, drawing an audience that surpasses the Super Bowl, NBA Finals, and the Oscars combined. If you're unfamiliar, there are great explainers elsewhere on YouTube, but in this video I'll be diving into the visual side of Eurovision, especially its branding. And to help me do that, I've invited self-confessed Eurovision obsessive, expert on all things live TV and friend of the show, Fernand, to join me in unpacking the logos, theme art and visual graphics of the contest over the years. So let's get stuck in. Editor Linus here. Now, I'd love to share some footage of this year's host city of Malmö here, but that would usually mean actually leaving my apartment, which is honestly a non-starter. Luckily, I don't have to, thanks to this video's sponsor, Storyblocks. If you're not familiar, Storyblocks is a stock media platform that offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high-quality content for one predictable subscription cost. No more expensive pay-per-clip pricing. Just pick a plan, pay that fee, and you're set. You'll enjoy a curated library of over 1 million HD and 4K video files, images, and motion graphics templates. Speaking of motion graphics, Storyblocks has expanded their library beyond Adobe Premiere Pro and After Effects, and now cover my editor of choice, DaVinci Resolve, with customizable templates for motion graphics and animated sequences. It's always easy to find what you're looking for on Storyblocks because their platform is really intuitive and new content is commissioned frequently to ensure you'll have fresh assets for your next project. To get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/Linus Bowman or click the link beneath this video. Now, to clarify something from the start, the European Broadcasting Union, EBU, is the organization that runs the Eurovision network, with the Eurovision Song Contest being its flagship program. The logo for these three entities has been shared for much of its history, which we'll get into, but throughout this video I'll be using Eurovision as shorthand for the Eurovision Song Contest. Of course, logos are just part of the branding of the contest, but we can broadly say there have been 3 logos used over its history. So let's start there. First, we have the original logo for the Eurovision network, which debuted at Italy's San Marino Song Contest, which predates the Eurovision Song Contest by a couple of years.
The Eurovision Star logo, it all began back in 1954. It was created by a stage designer from the BBC called Timothy O'Brien, and this ident of sorts was broadcast ahead of the actual show itself to essentially signal the Eurovision network coming to your screens, along of course with the loud and bombastic Te Deum introduction music.
This logo is very old school from the black and white era of television, so without the luxury of color and high definition, logos relied heavily on strong shape and form. This one is no exception. It's boldly graphic in that mid-century style, and likely painstakingly drafted with pen and paper originally, with various permutations seen over the years. Like many TV idents from its time, it may have even involved some 3D props for various iterations, perhaps fashioned from string using a cat's cradle, as seen in this similar logo for the French broadcaster RTF. And after almost 4 decades of use, this logo became a very recognizable and beloved part of Eurovision, not changing until the 1990s. Now, online sources say that the EBU changed its logo in 1993, but we don't actually see it used before the broadcast of the contest until 1995. Regardless, this logo is very 90s and very corporate. We have here 3 arrowheads, or V's, coming together, joined by a yellow circle, loosely implying collaboration.
I agree, it does feel very corporate, but I think it also reflects a change in nature of the corporatization of television as we've seen through the late 80s and early 90s. You saw the BBC's identity that changed in 1988, going from something warm and kitsch to something quite solid and stern and authoritative.
This style of logo suits a corporate business card, though seems a little flat for such a flamboyant affair as Eurovision. But that should be expected since, until this point, Eurovision's logo was not really for the contest, but a shared logo for the EBU and the Eurovision network. But a decade later, and finally the song contest itself receives a dedicated and permanent logo, composed of a custom brush-style wordmark for Eurovision with the heart symbol letter V containing the host country's flag, with Song Contest, the year and host city written underneath.
So yeah, 2004 came around and the Eurovision Song Contest got a whole new look. It was the first year with semi-finals, I guess to help accommodate the amount of countries that really wanted to take part. I think it was also to reflect the fact that Eurovision was not just a television show, it was a global brand. In similar vein to FIFA, to the Olympics, broadcasting globally, they wanted to have an identity that was recognizable, but to allow each contest to have its own take on it.
Originally, the typography was set in microgamma, but in 2015, the logo got a small refresh, the logo was simplified and slightly streamlined, and the typeface changed to Gotham. Now, this font was pretty ubiquitous by 2015, and that, along with its neutrality, actually works perfectly for this job. That is to allow each year and each host city to design their own identity and theme art without the typography distracting and drawing too much attention to itself. Now, fittingly for the 50th anniversary of ABBA's iconic Eurovision win in 1974, this year's Eurovision is hosted in Sweden. So let's first take a look at this year's host city, Malmö, and its previous two occasions playing host. Starting with 1992, it's a very understated, perhaps even generic logo, reflective of that era of motion graphic technology. With its 5 colored stripes and the serif text in Perpetua, it fails to make a huge impression. Although the same can't be said for the mascot created for that year, Eurobird, which is rumored to induce sleep paralysis in 1 in 9 people. But the second go around in 2013, it's a much more elaborate concept with a striking CGI butterfly that creates an almost photo collage effect, which evokes for me the first generation of the Adobe Creative Suite branding. The butterfly motif is repeated throughout the contest, with each nation's flag receiving its own unique butterfly animation. And clearly Sweden was doing something right that year, as we even got a cameo from Cloud from Final Fantasy. Moving on to this year's theme, it's quite on trend, with elements of that bento box style that's become so popular since Apple featured it in their marketing, though with a different spin here, combined with a vibrant set of moving gradients which have been tied back to the northern lights. Now, here I have a small quibble, as this phenomenon is typically visible only above the 60th parallel north, but the southern city of Malmö sits at the 55th parallel, rather far from the auroral belt.
Aurora Borealis, at this time of year, localized in this part of the country.
Despite my geographical gripe, the Northern Lights still make a suitable theme for the host country more broadly. This year, being the 68th Eurovision Song Contest, there's no way I could cover every year in detail. So from here, Fernand and I are going to rapid fire through the decades, highlighting some of the best and most interesting contest branding in our personal opinions. Then I'll be back to share a few closing thoughts.
Of course, something that's creative from the 1963 contest, where you have a quadruple 16th note made up of all the country flags that were taking part that year. So it's quite groundbreaking to see that logo, and I guess maybe it was to capture the beginnings of the swinging 60s of the UK, it being the second time hosting the contest. 1968, everything is bright in glorious Technicolor. It was the first contest that was actually broadcast in colour that year, held in the UK, and it was obviously represented in its logo in gorgeous gold and purple.
One of my favorites has to be the 1974 Songbird logo. Generally, when symbols were used, they tended to be drawn from musical notation, which is a bit literal.
And I guess also to reference the fact that it was held in Brighton, so seagulls are everywhere, seagulls grabbing your chips. In this case, you've got seagulls grabbing microphones, so it's very apt.
Also, the way that the text wraps around the icon in that classic Optima typeface just makes it extremely nostalgic, and it's the perfect throwback logo to put on a t-shirt or a coffee mug.
one country really wants to try and establish a bit of a brand behind it, and that's the Netherlands. It all begins in 1970, where if you look really closely at this really interesting circular logo, it's actually made using music notes that's sort of smeared into lovely cross circular shape, and that's recognisable almost like the roundel or the 5 Olympic rings. And then when they host a contest again in 1976, it's that same logo. Of course, they dropped all the colours by this point, and then 4 years later, when the contest is held again in the Netherlands in 1980, it's used again, but it's shrunk in size as part of a golden circle, which almost looks like a vinyl record.
Now, these contest logos can really capture design trends of an era, and I think 1985 may be the pinnacle in that regard. It's a complete opposite of a timeless design, and that's what makes it so incredible.
So there's an actual documentary online that goes behind the scenes of the contest, and you see the actual artist sketching it out as a time capsule, because it actually goes really well with the whole stage design, which feels incredibly 80s.
Much of what we consider quintessentially 80s design are actually aspects that have been amplified in retrospect through parody and pastiche like GTA Vice City, but this logo shows that even if they were exaggerations, there is a grain of truth to them. The pink neon, wide track typography, and the color palette, it's all unmistakably 1985. Eurovision '89 is notable for being the first logo that's truly 3D animated. And while it might seem primitive today, these would have been fairly cutting-edge graphics back then. However, the style it's been rendered in was less cutting-edge. It was quite popular through the 80s, using this striped effect, which was a favorite amongst high-tech companies. It was a more commonly seen style when logos had to function in black and white print, because it was a way to create a sort of gradient illusion and give depth to a logo. Of course, there's one in particular that is strikingly similar, the logo for the game publisher Sierra. Of course, that logo depicts the half dome in the Sierra Nevada, whereas this logo is based on the Matterhorn in Switzerland. From one print effect to another, in 1990 we get a logo inspired by half-tone dots, with a symbol that could be read as a lowercase e, but also implies a pair of lips, especially when seen in animation. Very bold use of color, and certainly a standout. 1990 also gave us a mascot in the form of Eurocat, but the trend never caught on, and Malmö 1992 was the only other mascot introduced. Following that year in Sweden, Ireland then had an unprecedented streak, hosting the contest for 3 years in a row, and the progression of their logos from year to year is quite interesting. We start off fairly conservative in 1993 with something very clean, very simple. By 94 we have Dublin Castle in a rather painterly rendering, but by 95 things have gone completely gonzo.
This being its third win in 3 years, I guess RT must have been tearing his hair out, thinking this is potentially going to bankrupt us, and considering the fact that it was the 40th anniversary of the contest as well. So it was a very significant year. At this point, I guess really wanted to break free a little bit.
It's a very loose and free interpretation of a logo, but this was certainly daring compared with previous logos. 2 years later, Ireland hosts the contest for the 4th time in 5 years, but this time the flavour is quite different.
The contest really wants to capture a young audience, from the title sequence going very gothic and grungy and very metallic, and of course represented within the logo itself. It's all X-Files, it's all very moody teen of the 1990s, and this logo captures it.
The typography seems to be a custom font, though clearly inspired by Neville Brody's typeface Insignia, which was very influential through the 90s. Continuing the moody tone, for Y2K to mark the new millennium, Sweden went with a very stark and minimalist identity in black and white, using an even more aggressively angular typography, and for the icon, to quote the logo designers, Stockholm Design Lab, a sensual yet stylistically pure mouth, representing song, dialogue, and speech. It's definitely a bold choice, a bit Rocky Horror Picture Show, but one that stands out, and according to the official Eurovision blog, the lips were at one point considered to become the generic logo for the whole contest, when that changed in 2004, though ultimately they went with the heart wordmark. Of course, after 2004, we don't have new logos as such for the contest each year. We get what Eurovision calls theme artwork, and there have certainly been a wide range of styles.
I guess almost instantly, 2007. This is one of the first few years where the identity of the contest, look and feel, the theme art really comes out within itself. So it's formed of a kaleidoscopic background, which is actually made up of the letter F for Finland, the finger pointer symbol, and speech marks. So I think it's done really well in terms of just giving you something different.
Germany's theme art for 2011, while it might not be the most original concept, this identity works best in motion. It's dynamic and layered, and the opposite of the very flat and static identities that were necessary when designers needed to think about print first. And this dynamic approach really took over thereafter. Malmö 2013 also had a very dynamic identity, but with an organic feel, taking inspiration from nature.
A nice little contrast to 2014, which feels different from the previous years, but is beautifully done despite being angular, retains a level of warmth.
By this point, social media had become a huge part of the contest experience, as can be seen by the hashtag #JoinUs overshadowing the Eurovision logo itself. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the Ukrainian design for 2017. Conceptually, it's based on the various patterned beads of traditional folk craft necklaces, but with a fresh modern take. It was a very versatile and interesting pattern-forward identity with elements of op art. Very well executed and quite memorable.
One of my favourites is probably the 2021 logo, which may just think it's a whole bunch of colours, but when you look really closely, it's actually beautifully designed and represents all the countries that have taken part in the contest since its inception, laid out in a circle, going around almost like a clock. So you see lots of reds and blues, all the sort of Western Europe countries, all the way through to a little speck of Australia at the sort of 11 o'clock mark. It's got a lot of extra thought behind it.
Overall, I think that the branding for Eurovision has only become more compelling in the last few years, as the bar has been continually raised to bring more conceptual designs to the theme art, and the technical execution has only become stronger. But the fun of looking back through the history of Eurovision is that each contest acts like a time capsule, capturing not only the pop music zeitgeist in Europe, but a perfect snapshot of visual culture more broadly, including trends in graphic design, motion design, and even broadcast technology. A huge thanks to Fernand for joining me in this video. You should definitely take a look at his excellent deep dive on the production of the 2023 contest, amongst other excellent videos on his channel. And a big thanks as always to my patrons over on Patreon who support this channel and make these videos possible. To all the countries who've made it to the final, I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you all have a fantastic time watching. My name is Linus, and I hope I'll see you all in a future video.